Shabbat Shalom, man. Let's raise our hands in prayer to Father Yahweh. Most holy and righteous Father Yahweh in heaven, this is Kohen Kanath Hawkins, a seedy anointed servant Yisrayl, the great Kohen Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, and by and through the authority of Yahshua Messiah, the great high priest over your house, asking and praying, Father Yahweh, in unity with the priest in the great house of Yahweh, that you would receive us in prayer on this, the holy Sabbath day, Father Yahweh, the 14th day of the third moon Noah. Father Yahweh, as we once again gather to learn your great laws of life out of this great book of Yisrayl, we pray for your inspiration, that you would allow us to continually grow in righteousness and to go forth and become teachers of righteousness. All in Yeshua's name we pray, as a seedy anointed servant Yisrayl, being guided by Spirit Holy. HalleluYahweh. Praise Yahweh. Please be seated. We are going to be in the fifth book of Yisrayl. It's entitled The Kingdom of Priests. What I'd like to do first is to go ahead and read the dedication, which is found on a page with the letter I, right there in the beginning. Because one of the things that you'll be able to see is how things, even at that time, this was in 2005, how things apply to the work of Yahweh and actually to the message that's going forward, and also how prophecies were laid out at that time. So starting in the dedication, it reads, "We are now in the last year of man's government on the earth. That means we are only 1 year away from the greatest kingdom of all." And remember, this book is entitled The Kingdom of Priests. The kingdom of Yahweh being fully established. Every day we see the fulfillment of the prophecies that Yahweh inspired for his last era of the House of Yahweh. With each prophecy that is fulfilled, we long more and more for Yahweh's kingdom of priests, which will soon put an end to sin and the curses of sin, which we see so rampant now, even in the streets of America. As we look out into the world around us, we see misery growing to an unbearable degree. We see suffering of all kinds through the man-made sin caused disease, epidemics, and pandemics. We see nothing but death and destruction caused by wars that the world's leaders say will bring peace. We see the use of weapons that are so devastating that they will soon cause the light of the sun and moon to be darkened and all hope of life to be gone. In the midst of all this misery, death, and destruction, a single light shines forward. And of course, that's this great work of the great house of Yahweh. The greatest work of Yahweh in the history of mankind is flourishing and thriving while the world around us dies, while taking the last warning message to all inhabitants of the earth. Yahweh's servant, the seventh Malach, the great white buffalo, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, is putting the finishing touches on Yahweh's saints. Now remember, we were coming out of the sealing at this time. And if you think about it, that sealing really is for the house of Yahweh. Many people that were here at that time are not here, but even those that have filled their places, fit within that same sealing. Okay? The sermons in the fifth book of Yisrayl cover the entire year of 2005. At that time, Yisrayl had just sealed the saints of Yahweh. He labored the entire year to give us a greater understanding about the awesome kingdom that is soon to come. And that's what we see in this book right here. If you will diligently read and study these sermons, you will learn more and more why and how the world got in the shape that it's in today. You will learn the details of the laws that we are now keeping that will be used to bring the earth back to full production. You will learn exactly what you and your family need to do to be a part of the great work of Yahweh now. and part of the kingdom of Yahweh throughout eternity. It is our prayer that all of Yahweh's saints will truly realize that they have been called into one body to be taught by the seventh Malach, Yisrayl Hawkins, and will be eternally thankful for this opportunity. So with great reverence and thanksgiving, we dedicate the work of love to our Heavenly Father Yahweh through Yeshua Messiah, the High Priest and soon coming King of Kings, being seeds of the last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins. And now, without further delay, we'll turn to page 1. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, page 1, chapter 1. The title of this sermon, The United States and Prophecy, number 5. The kingdom of Yahweh has ordained in advance to permit the actions of the evil, beastly system of today. Now, what you'll see and learn in this sermon is Pastor really lays out the fact that all that we see with the governmental beastly system, the do's, don'ts, which it's been allowed to do through prophecy, has all been laid out. Okay, so now in the beginning of this sermon, Pastor talks a couple of things here. He talks about the water pick. Okay, so we're going to start at verse 3. Well, let's go up in verse 2. He says, I need to say something about the teeth and the oils. I don't want you to get mixed up on these oils that Kahan Yedidia mentioned. The Staphylococcus hibernates in your sinus area. Now, what he goes on to explain is that it can actually get into your oral cavity and affect your teeth. Now, let's drop down. It says, a diseased gum will loosen up and be puffy. It will be soft. It won't be strong and healthy where it will support your teeth. That is the way Yahweh made it. The gum system is to support our teeth. Okay, if you have gum problems, you may think you have toothaches, but you don't. Now, he starts talking about the water pick here. And he says, I believe I was reading this in the Kabbalah, about using the use of a water pick to clean the teeth in the gum area. I don't know for sure, but I think that was where I read about it. And he talks about in ancient days where they used the sacks, the wine sacks, and they actually used a tubular part of the grape vine in order to be able to clean the teeth area. Okay? Now, the big thing that for time's sake, is that the use of salt water. Now, if you look in verse 4, Pastor says, I was having some gum problems at the time. I still do this. I put about a half a teaspoon of salt in the container of the water pick, along with a teaspoon of vinegar. Now, drop down, he says, use that, and then after you get through, fix salt water and vinegar and rinse your mouth thoroughly, okay? And even if your gums bleed a little bit, that's not something that's going to be of a concern. Now, in verse 5, this is something that you can underline if you've got your pen. Salt is one of the healthiest things there is for your body, and you really need to use it. The Kabbalah says sour wine, but that is vinegar. Okay, now he goes on to say about for Staphylococcus that you could go ahead and use the thieves oil in order to let's see here. You can use the thieves oil in order to breathe it, and even he mentions about even if you have to go in hospitals and places like that, that it's much, much better, to have that thieves. Okay, now he goes over, he continues talking about the thieves oil. In verse 8, he says, thieves oil will stop this staphylococcus that is coming through the air from other people. The oil kills it instantly. So always remember that when you use the oils. Now, one of the things that he talks about here before he gets into the prophecy of the beastly system, he said, that's why, and we're still in verse 8, if you turn the page, that's why you need the ashes of the red heifer. So you want to go in and underline that. You need the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on you. They enter your body, and you have an army of useful soldiers working for you when you get sprinkled. Now, our understanding of the ashes of the red heifer has even greatly increased since this sermon took place. Now, Wood he goes further to explain, which is he was making preparations for Passover, because this took place in the first Roman month. He asked everybody to try to plan to be here for the 19th of the 4th Roman month that year. And the reason for that was because, as you know, as you will read and see, that the ashes of the red heifer have to be sprinkled on the 3rd and the 7th day. So he was trying to get the people to get here early in order to be sprinkled before the feast started. You should be able to get here by the 3rd day, the 19th, and be sprinkled before sundown. Why? Because the law says that you have to be sprinkled in the 3rd day and the 7th day. Okay, we will sprinkle on the 19th, our homes, the sanctuary, and he goes on about everything. Okay, and then he says, then we'll sprinkle again that Sabbath. So that Sabbath would be the 7th day of the week. So get that firmly set in your mind, the 3rd day of the week and the 7th day of the week. And then he goes on to talk about when Yeshua's memorial starts. And let's see here. Then in verse 11, he says, then we will be clean on that 2nd day of the week. Okay, at sunset, the 25th. We will be clean, and the sanctuary will be clean. Then we should be able to stay clean before Yahweh and out of the world those 5 days there. And that's, one of the lessons that he's teaching us here. We have to stay clean for the feast in these appointments with Yahweh. So let's drop down to verse 13, Numbers 19:11. Notice how long you're going to stay unclean. Now, if we're unclean from a dead body, he's going to explain to us here. Okay, you can't stay unclean any shorter than this right here. You're going to be unclean 7 days. So 7 days we're unclean from that death, or that death bug from a dead body. And he goes on to say the 4 alls won't help you with that either. You have to do things according to the laws. Okay? And Numbers 19:11, he who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. There's no way you can shorten this time period. You're going to be unclean at least 7 days. Okay? Now, drop down to 16. After sprinkling on the 3rd day, you still have 7 more days of uncleanness. See how much he gets this in our minds, okay? The 7 days of your uncleanness will be the next 2nd day. So let's go forward. Now that we've understood that about the ashes of the red heifer, now let's see here. Look at the end of verse 21. Pastor says, let's stay clean. Yahweh knows. In other words, there should be no reason for anyone to go to town once the feast starts, once we've been sprinkled. Okay, now he's going to get back to Revelation 17, which was in the previous sermon that he had, and this is like a real great recap of it here. He says, we're going to continue to learn about Yahweh's plan, why all of these things are being allowed, and how this has actually come about. Keep in mind that Yahweh said through Yachanan that in the beginning was the plan, and that's what he wants to focus us on. Everything about the beastly system, what can be done, what can't be done, it's all within the great plan of Yahweh. Okay? Now, of course, the world teaches that Yahweh is a mean and vicious God, and in verse 24, he says, I would that they would stand in front of a mirror sometime and listen to the words coming back to them to see how stupid they are for saying that. This is propaganda. It means, it's not meant to come out against the God. That propaganda is meant to come out against Yahweh. Okay, so now on the next page, let's go to page 3. If you go to verse 31, Pastor says, the deaths that are caused are not going to stop. A third part of the people are going to be killed over a fourth part of the earth in the initial stages of this war, and it's going to get worse. You know, underline that, because see, this was said in 2005, and we've seen it getting worse, you know. Now, let's see here. Let's read verse 34, Revelation 17:1, and there came one of the 7 Malachim, which we know, Pastor, is that Malach, okay, who had the 7 bows and talked with me, saying to me, come, I will show you the sentence of the great whore. And that's what you'll get a lot of in the second part of this lesson here. You know, Pastor goes into detail to show that this sentence is the judgment that's been brought forth by the courts of heaven. The word also was judgment. Okay, let's drop down to verse 37. They pushed to get their people into politics and get their men to be judges. Now, he's talking about the Catholic Church here, you know, about how they control the politics of all of the kings of the world. You know, every worldly king, every nation, in one way or another, is going to find themselves in subjection to the Catholic Church. Drop down to verse 38. The one that reigns over the kings of the earth is a great city. If you look back to verse 9, you will see that city that sits on 7 hills. And we all know and understand here, you know, it is the Catholic Church. Okay, now on page 4, go to verse 41. Pastor says, none of this is going to change the plan. Keep that firmly in your mind. Nothing that takes place is going to go outside of Yahweh's plan. It's allowed through what? Through that sentence, through that judgment that's been pronounced. Okay, look where he says, when he refers to the sentence or judgment of this great whore. Okay, now drop down. He talks about in verse 12 about the 10 horns, which you saw, the 10 kings. So in verse 45, in this verse, we see these 10 kings given or ordained to do this. So the 10 kings were ordained to perform everything that they do, and it's all according to Yahweh's plan. Okay? And you could read further there. It says, in the 10 horns, which you saw, are 10 kings, which as yet have not received a kingdom, but what? But receive authority as kings 1 hour, that 1 hour burning that's going to take place that we know is in Revelation 18. Okay, so in verse 46, Pastor says, about this hour, the Hebrew lexicon without point says a portion of time, a one cut short. Does that make you think of anything? A portion of time, a one cut short, talking about this specific time period. You know, this time period is the time period that is cut short. Okay, Pastor goes on to say, these 10 kings will be given power in this time period to help the Catholic Church. They were ordained. You can underline that. They were ordained for this purpose before the earth was. They were ordained for this purpose. They're going to receive or have received this ordination to do this and give their power in a time period cut short. Okay, now let's look down. Let's go to verse 49. Okay, in this time period, this 3.5 year period that we are in right now, in this time period, we see these kings doing this thing. Now, these are 10 kings in 1 hour. The Catholic Church will get caught up into this. The Catholic Church is not going to come out a winner in this. She says she hopes she will. If you remember Malachi Morton's book, I have quoted so many times, the keys of this blood shows the plans of the Catholic Church and what is taking place today. Malachi Morton spoke of these things in his interviews. I have his interviews also, the important ones, that show the Catholic Church and how they plan to do this with the nations they come against. Okay, and of course, they come against the nations that will not worship Mother Mary. Okay, verse 50, before the wars were ever started with Afghanistan and Iraq, Malachi Morton said they were going to be, he said Mary was going to wage war against these Muslim nations, and they were going to suffer greatly. They are suffering greatly, just as Malachi Morton said. The Catholic Church is not going to remain out of this thing. The explosives and the actions that are planned on being used here are not things the Catholic Church is going to evade either, because we know, as it shows in Revelation 18, they will burn. Okay, it's going to get caught in its own trap, as King David was inspired to write. Now remember verse 12, verse 13, these have one purpose. These 10 kings, the leaders of these powerful nations, they are going to help in achieving this overall plan that the Catholic Church, the city that sits on 7 hills, has for the whole world with its nations and multitudes. These 10 kings are given power as kings to support this plan and to try to bring about a one world religion. They're going to have to use extreme force and power. This means nuclear power. All of the power they have in order to bring this about. Now in verse 52, he continues in verse 13, and they give their power and authority to the beast, speaking of the 10 kings. They give their power and authority to the beast. So with that, I've run out of time. If everyone would please stand. I have the great honor to introduce our next priest, the Great Kahan Zephaniah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Yahweh's blessings be with each and every one of you. We're going to continue where the Great Kahan left off there on page 5 here, and this is, I'm going to go back and read the title again. This is chapter 1 of the 5th book of Israel, the Kingdom of Priests, and this title really sums up the basis, what Pastor is covering here in this sermon, that the Kingdom of Yahweh has ordained in advance to permit the actions of the evil beastly system of today. And this word ordained, it's allowed, it's given permission to fulfill a certain purpose. So as the Kahan mentioned, all authority is ordained by Yahweh, and even this authority we see in the earth at this time, and where it's going to lead to, we know that 4/5, it's going to lead to 4/5 of the earth's population being destroyed. That's all allowed. Yahweh is allowing it for a certain reason. And in this sermon, Pastor really hits on Isaiah chapter 24. And if you remember, now this was 15 years ago. You think back 15 years ago and how much our understanding has grown since that time. I remember Pastor saying at one point, he said, when you get the use of your subconscious mind, you're going to be amazed at all the things that you've been taught, that I've taught you over these years. And this makes me think of this right here when I see this sermon from 2005 and how he spends a great deal of the sermon on Isaiah 24. Well, if you remember, Isaiah 24 used to say, behold, Yahweh makes the earth empty. Well, we know now, Yahweh doesn't make it empty. He doesn't cause that destruction. That's the same as saying, Yahweh's bowl of wrath is being poured out. Well, it's not Yahweh's wrath. It's a judgment that he has allowed. So we know the corrected verse there in chapter 24, verse 1, Yahweh allows the earth. And, when we read that now, we just know, hey, Yahweh is allowing this to take place. But this is how much our understanding has grown through the teaching that we receive in the House of Yahweh. And I want to read you give you one example about this. Yeshua understood this point right here. That Yahweh is in full control and all things are according to Yahweh's plan. Now this is the 8th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 15, verse 22. And Pastor says, He says all things were done according to it, this plan of Yahweh, and this is being done according to this plan. Without it, nothing was done that was done. He's guiding everything. He either allows it or it doesn't occur. That's it, And that's the reason Yeshua said, you would have no power over me except Yahweh Himself is allowing it for the Scriptures to be fulfilled. And Yeshua, again, he had a perfect understanding of that because, he knew the things that took place even in his own personal life. It was being allowed to fulfill the Scriptures. So with that, let's turn to page 5 here, and we're going to continue. We're going to hit the high points here of the sermon, but I would encourage everyone to go back and finish reading it, especially the last page if we don't get to cover all the information there, because Pastor talks about the word must and how it's a necessity, and the Scriptures show that these things have to come to pass. It's a necessity that mankind experience what their choices have brought. And that's the whole reason here we're in these last days, the very last part, where the plagues are coming upon the earth, and the last one, which brings about the nuclear burning. So in verse 53, Yahweh in His great wisdom can calculate these things and know what is going to take place and when it's going to take place. Now, to me, this is fascinating that Yahweh has this ability that He can so far in advance be so precise and get it just exactly right. And remember, recently, Pastor, he explained to us how when Abel's blood was shed and that blood went into the earth, it started a process. Now that process, 6,000 years ago, and then you see the blood that has been spilt from mankind's war and fighting, adding to that all these years has now come to this time period. And not just the last days, but the very last part of the last days, these last 3.5 years, to where that now the earth is bringing that back up. As the Scriptures say, it's vomiting it back out. And it's showing mankind, this is what you've done. This is a result of your choice, this continual war. So that, to me, that ability, to calculate and know through all the microorganisms and that whole process that it would be exactly at this time period, that shows the brilliance that Yahweh has. And all things are according to that plan. Nothing outside that plan was done or is being done. So we see it all coming down here to this very last time period. Let's look at verse 59. Well, Yahweh is letting this take place. Okay, notice, He's allowing it. He's not making it take place. He's allowing it to take place. He says, I know from the path they're going to follow that this is what they're going to do. We will allow this. We won't allow this over here because this would interfere with my plan. Do you understand what I'm saying? And if you think of the example of Job, the book of Yeshub. Now, we reading about Job, we get the insight, we see the conversation that Yahweh had with Satan, and he said, no, you can go this far, but you can't go any further. But Job didn't know that. He didn't hear that conversation. He just had to live through it. He was the one experiencing it, but he didn't know Yahweh set the limit there, and that Satan could only go a certain distance. So, we know, though, through the teaching of the Scriptures that, well, Yahweh tells us this work is not going to see the grave. This one is going to bring in the kingdom. So we have a great insight. Yahweh has blessed us to see the very end result here, basically how this whole thing ends. And if the very latest Prophetic Word magazine, let me show you this right here. This is the sin no more, or a worse thing will come upon you. And inside this issue, massive suicide and prophecy for this generation. Well, Pastor begins by talking about it, and I want to read this one paragraph here because we know how it ends, and I'm not going to try to zoom in there because I don't want to mess it up. But it says, this prophecy has a very joyous ending. Now I know we look and we're going to see all the rest of these 6 plagues, and we're going to see the nuclear burning and 4/5 of mankind be destroyed. And that's not going to be joyous to see. But it is necessary for us, as Pastor explains why we need to see it, but also why mankind needs to go through it. But he says here, this prophecy has a very joyous ending. And this is what I would like to focus on right here, is this joyous ending. And I'm reminded of Jeremiah 29:11. It says, where Yahweh says, I have intentions to give you what you hope for. And that is to give you the future you hope for, which is perfect peace, which is really what all mankind is seeking after, but not able to find it because they stepped outside of Yahweh's law. And that's the lesson that they need to learn. So continuing here, it says, this prophecy has a very joyous ending. If you are in, now here's the stipulations. Remember, like we learned in class, it's conditional. If you are in the right place, at the right time, holding a repentant attitude. Okay, so notice, here's the attitude. We have to be sorrowful for our contribution in what we see that's taken place in this world, and a converted heart, as shown in the two greatest commandments. So I thought that was a really great, both encouragement and statement there that Pastor made here about this prophecy as a very joyous ending, because too many times we only see the destruction there, but we know, as was brought out today, afterwards we'll see the kingdom of Yahweh set up, and that's really what we're looking forward to. Okay, so let's continue here. Let's look over at page 5 here, up on the right column. It says, well, this is where she gets caught up in her own scheme. And we the people of Yahweh, we're not gonna raise a hand against mankind. This is where the choices they chose come back upon them. She's going to get caught up and be destroyed along with these 10 nations, and this will destroy about 4/5 of the earth's population. That's what is going to take place here at that time. We're going to see nuclear bombs falling like rain. They'll fall like rain. And again, Pastor goes on to explain why this is so necessary that this take place. And in the next couple verses, he explains, because really what's the solution? Well, the solution to this whole mess is the laws of Yahweh, the peaceful solution. And he explains here that when the peaceful solution is presented, many people, they realize it and they say, yeah, this is what's needed. And the teachers, they say this is what's needed. And Pastor says, I can see the inspiration of Yahweh in this peaceful solution and the way it is presented. The teachers can see this. Now, notice there's a reason, though, behind it, because there has to be a changing of the heart and mind. And we see here, because force won't change, and it never had. Otherwise, we would have seen that change come about already in mankind. Force won't change it. Well, Pastor says, we have people who are in big churches who say, this is what we need. This is what we've needed all along. They've admitted with their own mouths that this is the only thing that is going to change mankind. Wars won't change mankind. Force won't change him. Man has to have his heart and his mind changed. And one thing that we see that Pastor mentions in the sermon is the cities of confusion. Right now you can, Al Jazeera, I'll show you a picture. Al Jazeera, in fact, I'll show you to you right now while I have it up. But I don't know, can you see that at all? I don't know if I can zoom in on that, but every one of those little orange, tan colored dots are cities where there were protests recently. And this was as of the 2nd of this 6th Roman month. So, think of 4 days later and how many more are added to this. It's over 350 plus cities, okay, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And since then, it's spread internationally. Europe, Middle East, they've seen protests too because of the death of a man. And Pastor mentions here, as he goes through Isaiah 24, cities of confusion. And this is what it makes me think of, on how there's such confusion going on. They're out there and they're fighting, they're protesting. They say they want greater laws, stricter laws, so that if something like this occurs, there's a stricter punishment. But if you think about that, that's only just a fear a fear tactic to try to change the heart and mind of someone. That doesn't work. Fear doesn't change the heart and mind. It has to be a willingness that, look, I don't want to hurt you, and the other person has to say, I don't want to hurt you either. Let's have the respect for one another. It has to be a change there, and that's only done through Yahweh's laws. So, this is the confusion that mankind has in their mind at this time. They want peace, but they don't know how to get it. They don't know. They've rejected the one thing that can bring them peace, and that's Yahweh's way. So, and all of this is brought down now to this these last 3.5 years, where we see the result, the whole culmination of what their ways have brought, and pastors saying this is absolutely necessary. It's necessary for them to learn this lesson, and necessary for us to learn it, to have it as an example that we will forever recall and teach to the universe. So let's continue here in verse 67. Well, if you remember all the sermons I brought on fornication and the microorganisms, I showed they enter the body and the mind through sin to bring about this hatred. So notice, what's causing the hatred. They bring about a mind that is confused and turns to hatred. This is why you see the violence today. It's not a result. It's not a result of the death of one man. It's the breaking of Yahweh's law that has caused confusion, and now it might be the reason that they use, but it's the violence that we see today. It's a result of breaking these laws that, if they were followed, it would teach mankind to be peaceful. So let's look at page 6 here as we continue. On verse 72, well, it's ordained to take place. That is, it's allowed. It's allowable. And notice Pastor gives here 2 reasons, and this is what I mentioned earlier. In order for Yahweh to show what sin brings, and to bring out a people like himself who will fight against it. And it's not the fighting that we see in the streets. It's to fight against the sin, to push against sin and not allowing it in our lives, and to set their minds against it. So those are the 2 reasons. So it's as necessary for mankind to go through this last 3.5 years and experience the result of their choices as it is for us to see what sin brings as well. Just as, if you remember how Pastor explained, it was necessary for Yeshua even to go through his suffering, even though he never sinned. It was necessary. Verse 73, Isaiah 24, and here's where he gets into this, Isaiah 24, and again, this was 15 years ago, and if you think about our understanding since then, it's greatly increased. So Pastor says, let me read it the old way first. Behold, Yahweh makes the earth empty. Well, he doesn't make the earth empty. That word is totally off, and every authoritative book says it is. Yahweh allows it to occur. The plan from the beginning allowed this. He made a decision to allow this to take place. And let's look down at verse 78. Well, the land is utterly emptied and utterly plundered, for Yahweh has spoken. And Pastor pauses there, and he said, now that word spoken, it actually means ordained. So there is it's been allowed. It was in the plan of Yahweh. The other day, thinking about here the sermon, I had a job to do, and whenever I have a job, I like to plan my work and then work that plan. And I was telling my children this, and then I said, I turned on the ball valve and I said, let there be water. And then I plugged in the heater and I said, let there be hot water. Yes, it's just when you plan something out, it runs very smooth. And that was, this is what the point here that Yahweh is showing. It's all going according to the plan. Nothing has been done outside of that. He's in full control. And remember, even the full control, I'm in full control, That dream, I believe that was in 2015, 10 years after Pastor explained all this to us. So, the message of Yahweh has been the same all the way down. Our understanding continues to grow. Yahweh's in full control. He always has been in full control, even before we came to realize that Yahweh's in full control. So let's look at verse 87 here. And this is still in Isaiah 24, verse 10. Well, the cities of confusion are broken down. Every house is shut up, so no man can come in. And, Pastor says, well, what do you think this might be here? Remember, this is 2005. It's plagues, brethren. It's the plagues that are going to come from the sickness. And now we see it. This is when he said that, he pointed that scripture out to us. Just as when Yeshua made the prophecy that the temple, you see how beautiful it looks, it's not going to stand. Well, 40 years later, that finally came to pass. 40 years later. So, this is 15 years later, Pastor was telling us, and it might have even been earlier, but he tells us here, there's going to be quarantine. The houses are going to be shut up. And what's going to be the cause? It's plagues. It's the pandemics. They're coming. And now we're seeing it. We're experiencing it. And remember, Yeshua said, I tell you these things in advance, so when they come upon, when you see them take place, you might believe. And that was the whole reason of the prophecy. It's to strengthen the determination, the belief that people have that Yahweh is real. It's what Pastor says. He said it in this Prophetic Word magazine that, that the reason is to show and prove that Yahweh is who he says he is. He's the only one that can prophesy. And he's done that, throughout the history here. Okay, let's look at verse 92. Well, he told you what is going to take place in the first 6 verses, and that is still Isaiah 24. He's giving you a few details of what is going to take place and what to look forward to. These are things that have actually been judged by the kingdom of Yahweh as necessary to take place in order to get people to see what sin will do and what the confusion that comes from sin has brought to the world. So, a couple different reasons there. It's necessary in order to get people to see what sin will do. If you think of, if this whole thing stopped right now, and we know that it won't because the prophecies are sure, but, mankind would still have that, prideful, stubborn, arrogant attitude, thinking that, they can just do away with Yahweh's law and everything is going to be fine. But the lesson here is to show them that they cannot live without Yahweh's laws, without that guidance. So he said, notice, he uses the word confusion in verse 10, the cities of confusion, confused cities. And as I showed the map there, that's, to me, those are very confused cities here as they go out and they protest. But the protests, they're not going to bring about the result that they hope for, because there's only one way to get that desired peace, and that is through Yahweh's laws. But, of course, mankind has to come to that knowledge. We've been taught these things for years, and we know it's the only way, but they don't see that yet. So their time is coming to learn that lesson. In verse 97, and it will come to pass that in the day that Yahweh will allow this punishment, well, this disaster, this destruction, upon the host of the high ones who are on high. That is, in the offices of control, the high offices of control, and the kings of the earth. As Pastor mentions, 10 of these kings are supporting this woman. This city that sits on 7 hills, Yahweh is allowing this. That is what he says here. Okay, so let me see here. I want to get to a stopping point. Okay, let's look at verse 104, because I do want to read the last. I want to close here on page 8, but I want to read something here in verse 104. Okay, in Revelation, so Pastor goes from Isaiah 24 to Revelation chapter 1. And he said, the revelation of Yeshua Messiah, which Yahweh gave to him to show his servants things which must shortly, and he focuses in on those 2 words, must shortly come to pass. Now this word shortly means come to pass in the shortened time. Okay, well, what other time is shortened? Okay, there is no other time except these last days here. That's the time cut short. The correct translation there actually means these things are designated for a time period that is cut short or severed. And then the word must here means to have need of, to be in want, have need of. Okay, and then Pastor gives a little example here. But let's turn the page, and we're going to close here with the verse 106 and 107, and we'll close. And it says, I want you to get everything set in your mind. I want to point this out and get you to understand everything that's being done from this earthquake or this bomb or whatever it was to everything that took place since we become conscious before birth until now has taken place for you. This was so it can be placed in your mind so you will never forget these things, and you will have knowledge of every aspect of what has taken place in the bodies and the minds of others and yourself. All of this is being recorded in your subconscious mind, whether you know it or not, and when you get the use of that, you will have all of this forever. You will never forget it, and you will be able to show it in detail. You will become the greatest teachers in the universe. It's needful. And that's the purpose here of that whole sermon, to show it's a necessity that these things must come to pass. Yahweh bless you. If you please stand. Most holy and righteous Heavenly Father Yahweh, great Father in heaven, this is Kohan Zephaniah Hawkins, coming in unity with the body of priests of the House of Yahweh, a seed and servant of the last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through Yeshua Messiah, our great high priest. Father, we do thank you for the words of life that you have blessed us by hearing the words of your servant and having these sermons of the overseer Yisrayl Hawkins to go back over, Father, and put us in remembrance of all the wonderful things that we have been taught here in your great house. We thank you for your plan, Father Yahweh, and we thank you for all the things that have been ordained in your plan, Father. The protection that you promise upon your people, Father, and also knowing that the things that we go through are for our benefit, and they are to form us and make us into individuals that will never allow sin to take place again. So we thank you for the great teaching we receive and your blessings. We do pray for the strength of everyone, Father, the health and the peace, Father, which we do all desire. We praise and bless you, and we ask this as a seed and servant of Yisrael Hawkins through Yeshua Messiah. HalleluYahweh.